Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of our Summer Brown Bag series. We're excited to have you here as we conclude our summer programming. Today, we actually have a really, really exciting presentation. I hope that you find it equally as exciting as I do. Our guest today is Andrea Anderson Gluckman, and she is a civic artist, photographer, researcher, and educator whose interdisciplinary practice bridges visual art, scholarship, and public engagement. Drawing on a background in international policy, conflict studies, and higher education, she creates immersive, research-driven projects that illuminate the hidden relationships between history, ecology, health, and civic life. Through photography, archives, mapping, data visualization, performance, and community collaboration, Andrea's work invites audiences to reconsider familiar landscapes as living repositories of memory, resilience, and interconnectedness. Her projects transform complex research into accessible public experiences that foster curiosity, interaction, and care for both people and place. Originally from the Arkansas Delta, she currently lives in Rochester and works with multiple collectives such as Remnants, Ecolab, and the Wild Register on issues of social justice, indigenous truth-telling, anti-racism, and climate action. Her artistic residencies span from the Mississippi Delta to Cairo. Her current creative projects address trees as living civic infrastructure, gospel music as civic repair, and waterkeeping practices as cultural resilience. And ecoacoustics as a path to environmental stewardship. She holds degrees from Harvard Divinity School and Hendrix College in the area of sociology, political science, and theological studies. Please join me in welcoming Andrea Gluckman to our platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Chanel, and welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen right now so we can get started. So hello, we are here to talk today about reimagining trees as mental health and community infrastructure under the auspices of a project I am very lucky to be working on called Civic Canopy. So I want to start not with a statistic or a research finding, but rather with a proposition. What if we thought about trees differently? Most of us, particularly this group, I would imagine, understands that trees are a net positive for humans and human health. We know they provide shade, they clean the air, they are one of the best tools that we have to mitigate climate change. Many of us find comfort and refuge spending time in parks or camping in the woods. But what happens if we take the trees out of the amenity, landscape, purely aesthetic category, that is something that's nice to have around, and into the category of actual infrastructure? Specifically, mental health and community infrastructure. So first, let me acquaint you with the bigger project, and then we can drill down into our topic for today. So Civic Canopy is a research and community-informed visual storytelling and public art project that explores Rochester's urban trees as civic beings, distributed health and public health infrastructure, social infrastructure, and ecosystem anchors. So I'm going to be using photography, drone imagery, narrative, physical specimens, and data visualization to tell that story, multiple modalities. And the project asks us to reconsider urban trees as active participants in the health of cities. So again, if we often describe nature in terms of what it provides for humans, shade, clean air, cooler temperatures, all of those things which are enormously important. but I am interested in pushing that conversation forward, deeper toward relationship. What does it mean to live in relationship with other beings that make a city habitable? So I'm an artist and a researcher, so we are going to be flowing back and forth between several ways of knowing today, from scientific research to public health, urban ecology, history, community, and art. But throughout this whole process, I invite you simply to look, because one of the premises of this project is that changing our relationship with the natural world may begin with something that simple, learning to notice things again. So as we begin, I have just like a minute and a little bit video to get us grounded and to also help us in this process of doing something that we usually do not have the luxury to do, and that is to stop and to look and to be present. And I ask that you hold whatever comes up for you, if anything does, throughout the talk, because we will be relating back to it. It's like a study within a study. Thank you for doing that with me. I feel better already. So some of the questions that I have been guiding my thinking for this particular conversation about reimagining trees as mental health and community infrastructure are the following. And that is, first, what does the evidence actually tell us about trees and human health, particularly mental, cognitive, emotional, and social health? Um, for many of us, and particularly in my field as an artist, this feels like a very intuitive assumption. And also, we understand that it has to be interrogated with real evidence and scientific studies, which I have tried to provide throughout this presentation. The second question that is guiding my thinking is how are communities trying to reconnect people or connect people for the first time with trees and other forms of and other forms of urban nature? What are the main challenges to that? What is preventing that from occurring? What do some of these efforts look like in Rochester? And finally, the larger question that I have that is driving me for, this many-month project is how can we develop a culture of trees? Not simply a city or a neighborhood that plants them, also important, but a culture that values them and endeavors to sustain them. Now, first, I have a few quick clarifications on my approach. And I do this because I respect y'all as my audience. And I want to clarify again, I'm not a medical professional. I come from where I come from, and I needed different types of frameworks to think about this so we could all be sharing a similar vocabulary. So these diagrams that I created help me parse out my approach in a few different ways. And one is the ways that many different ways that people understand the human nature relationship. So as you can see, it's this whole range of thought from folks who think about nature as primarily a resource, a commodity, something that can be monetized, moving through to conservationism, environmentalism. Some people on the other end of the spectrum believe in the active rights of nature, all the way to synchism and animism. Folks who believe that trees are sentient beings. So, what I wanted to do by putting this out there is to acknowledge that having a conversation like this is, fraught with complexity, obviously, and we're all going to be entering at different points. Um, I am using the language of infrastructure to encase this conversation because I wanted to focus on specifically the evidence that shows positive mental health impacts of trees on human health. Also want to recognize that I don't necessarily believe trees are only infrastructure. So that's number one. The second is I was trying to adapt what y'all know already inherently as the biopsychosocial model. But in thinking about how to do the survey of literature that I've been involved in, trying to think about which studies might be most salient for different audiences, and then trying to categorize them without the medical background to have correct ontology. I just wanted to have this diagram to show that I recognize there is so much that is overlapping. And I am very happy to take your advice and feedback from professionals about how to better categorize these in the future. So let us just move along now that we have that. How do trees benefit human health? We are drilling in today on mental health, which involves a number of different factors. Obviously, that is part of human health, but we need to zoom out to the 30,000-foot level and remember that trees have enormous, enormous benefit for human health. And that, as you can see, really runs the gamut from respiratory benefits to the amazing cooling properties of having trees, particularly in urban areas with heat islands, greatly reducing heat-related illnesses through shade and evapotranspiration, lower rates of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, lower systolic pressure, heightened immune response, and reduced inflammation markers linked to chronic disease. Crazy, amazing studies that have shown immune response related to organic compounds that are emitted from trees' leaves. Lower cortisol levels that help reset the nervous system. What we're going to talk about today, lower rates of depression, anxiety, lowers the tendency to ruminate, improved cognitive functioning, greater social cohesion, community well-being. There is evidence, ample evidence for all of these factors. So thinking about trees as a nature-based solution to deal with multiple and complex challenges is something that absolutely we need to be talking about, particularly in our cities. So I just wanted to kind of give a broader spectrum of some of the tremendous health benefits that trees have been proven to have. Again, we can intuit it. We know we feel good around trees, but this is why. So I want to focus in a little bit more on mental health because the mental health impacts of trees, largely writ, and also of urban nature, green space, all of which are different things that we'll talk about, is particularly compelling. And what I want to do, since we're on this first slide with studies, is to point out that At the bottom of each of these particular slides, I will have studies that uh, provide the essential backing for the claims that are being made. I also have a sources slide, a comprehensive one at the end of the presentation, which you'll be able to download if you want to, investigate more thoroughly and get the actual statistics. So rather than going through each study, I really wanted to paint this in broader strokes and highlight the patterns that emerge. And the patterns that emerge is that studies have associated green spaces, particularly ones with urban trees, as elements that lower the rates of psychological distress. Some of the data that you will see in these studies here is quite shocking, up to levels of almost 30%. Additionally, Bratman and colleagues has found that a nature experience, particularly with trees, reduced rumination, as well as reducing activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex. So for those of us who, are apt to really be caught in a negative thought structure, and when that is linked to an actual diagnosis, then this is time around trees has been proven to greatly reduce that element of reaction. Healthier amygdala structure has been shown to occur, greater amygdala resilience linked to proximity to nature, particularly to areas of forested areas or urban trees. Higher urban tree density is linked to lower rates of antidepressant prescriptions. That study in particular, even just reading that summary, I'm like, wow, there are so many other reasons why there could be lower rates of antidepressant prescriptions because of high urban tree density. However, the study actually parses it out and finds that connection satisfactorily. So, in general, fewer mental health problems, better overall health, all linked to exposure, proximity, time in green nature, urban tree areas, parks, and woodlands. Now, I want to recognize that we need to be careful with this literature because not every study is going to show exact causation. I just want to acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge that within these studies, it's interesting in and of itself that the way that nature is talked about varies greatly. Sometimes the term is green space. Sometimes the term is urban forest. Sometimes the term is woodland, parks, etc. And a number of our experts who hopefully are with us today from the Department of Forestry or Department of Parks and from the University of Rochester knows that those things are not interchangeable. There is a vast difference in almost every capacity between those things. However, what is the common thread is that the presence of trees always heightens the positive impact of whatever impact nature is having. And the other pattern that we see is that anything related to humans being in a natural environment is only going to enhance better health, be it physical, mental, emotional, social, etc. So we have a consistent picture emerging, and that is that environments that we live in obviously participate in our psychological lives. Again, because of the overlap, this is not a surprise, but it bears repeating. And we also know that our mental health does not stop at the boundary of our physical bodies. Now, there's a substantial amount of research that's been done around cognitive health and what the health impacts are, specifically, again, from urban trees, but also exposure to nature and green space. And one of the most influential frameworks that is talked about with under this set of parameters is attention restoration theory. And if anyone's not familiar, as I was not, the basic idea behind this is that much of modern life requires directed attention. We're constantly filtering information, we're navigating traffic, we're responding to emails, we're making decisions, things that require directed attention that can be fatiguing. And the natural environment, again, specifically trees, has the amazing power to engage in what a lot of researchers call soft fascination or soft attention. And the best way I can think of to describe it is like a branch moving in the breeze, like we saw in the video, clouds passing, water moving, leaves moving in the sunlight. So the intention that we have is engaged, but it is not being demanded in the same way, which gives our directed attention a chance to recover. And when our directed attention has a chance to recover, we are so much more capable cognitively to engage in tasks. Studies have found improvements in short-term memory and cognitive performance following interactions in greener environments. And studies have also linked even simply having a view of trees, just a view through a window, to improve academic performance on testing and work performance. So these, again, are studies that go much deeper than I am able to do at this moment, but I encourage you to take a look at them because I continually was amazed at some of the claims that were indeed supported by evidence. Also want to mention, but don't want to go into any kind of clinical discussion because that is not my wheelhouse, that doses of nature, which we'll talk about when we talk about strategies, have been used in studies to assist with the different aspects of ADD and ADHD that have complicated, that may be part of a child or a young person's experience. So that is also in the studies. I just wanted to point it out. So closely related, but not identical, is thinking about emotional health. And research has associated experiences of urban nature, trees in particular, with reduced anxiety, reduced tension, lower rates of depression and negative mood, as well as increased positive affect and psychological restoration. That is quite a claim. Indeed, there is another study that shows that the greater the biodiversity within an environment that is within proximity to someone is positively correlated with an even greater increased positive affect. So that is also important whenever we will be talking about strategies in terms of how can we make natural environments or assist natural environments to have more biodiversity, since there is a positive correlation to better emotional health. Another important point here, probably not a surprise to y'all, is that studies have shown that engaging with trees, urban planting, but also gardening, community orchards, the participation with that increases positive affect, vitality, and connectedness to nature as well. So in this sense, it's important to point out that the participatory dimension is also extremely important when it comes to parsing out how we can interact with trees for better emotional health. that distinction is very important when it comes to community health as well. So this has implications, all of this, not just for mental health, but for agency, for belonging, for stewardship, and for community identity. Now, nervous system regulation, I just had to kind of pull this out as a mini conversation because some of the findings were really striking to me in particular. A lot of the reason why some of us are involved in creative practice is directly linked to nervous system regulation. And the information that is out there about what trees in particular can do, natural environments can do to calm a nervous system, the evidence that is out there is so compelling. So I just wanted to pull out a few things. And one of them is the green signal. And if not sure if y'all have heard about this, it is interesting that the human eyes and the human brain can recognize more colors of green than any other color, which makes sense thinking about our deep history and our deep ancestors, living in Canopy. However, what I find interesting about this is that the various shades of green that we are built to recognize actually enhances psychological restoration and creates more positive emotional responses. So if you are in a space seeing multiple shades of green, your nervous system is responding. Fractals. This is also not new, but very interesting. Fractal patterns are, the examples that we see even in these images of repeating patterns on leaves, in the canopy, branches, ferns, in so many places in nature. And there's something called the fractal fluency theory or model that says that our human vision has become fluent in this kind of fractal language. And we can immediately process those features efficiently. So it creates an aesthetic experience. It creates a measurable reduction in physiological stress, which I found fascinating. There is a lot of work. One of these studies that I have listed on dappled light. So sun dappling or moving shadows when you're sitting and you're watching the tree branches sway, that moving pattern of sunlight filtered through leaves reduces physiological markers for stress and enhances autonomic recovery. Just that, just shadows and light. And sensory buffering, I always want to put that out, that trees in particular are amazing in helping to calm our senses by buffering the sound, the smells, and even the view for those of us who live in urban areas. So together, the reason I pulled this out separately, these studies make the case that trees and forests are restorative because they present a rich combination of visual patterns, movements, lights, and color that the human nervous system was built to process, which is the whole point of this conversation. We are built to be in communication, to be in community with these elements of nature. So, social health. Trees don't only affect us individually, obviously, they also affect what happens between us, what is possible. And this is where I think about the idea of trees as civic infrastructure. Research by Francis Kuo, William Sullivan, and others has examined how green common spaces, vegetated common spaces in particular, with trees in urban environments, there's been there has been a strong relationship found between how green the common space is and how strong the social ties are. So we know trees create gathering spaces. They have the power to convene. We know that trees define largely our civic spaces as parks, sidewalks, yards, city hall, courthouses, neighborhoods, and public squares. So historically and cross-culturally, trees have also functioned as meeting spaces, landmarks, sacred groves, boundary markers, memorials, and witnesses to the more harrowing moments of our history, and yet are also places of healing. I also thought it was important in the social health domain to mention that urban trees have been examined and have been found to actually reduce crime rates, to improve traffic safety, and to enhance neighborhood community capacity. So those are elements that I think are important and salient whenever we are having conversations out in communities about the importance of urban trees. Because as we will discover as we move along, one of the challenges to really investing in having urban trees as one of the major parts of our infrastructure is the community needs to be involved. They need to be on board. And one of the ways to talk about this is that trees will actually improve the neighborhood in ways that may not be as obvious. It's also important to remind you that afforestation, tree tending, planting trees also have positive mental health impacts and community building outcomes. All really important. So what are some of the strategies that can be employed to think about? If we accept that trees and access to trees and nature can support health, the question is, what do we actually do? What do we do about it? And there are a number of interventions happening and on numbers of levels. And these are just a few. Urban tree programs, which we'll talk about, mini forests, also known as Miyawaki forests, and afforestation, forest bathing, community gardens and orchards, park grazing, nature dosing, and site-based art and creative practice. So we will go through these little by little. And I want to be very clear that as I suggest these, particularly when it comes to the nature dosing or nature-based social prescribing, that I am not advocating for that strategy to replace any kind of mental health treatment. It is meant purely as a supplementary measure that many people are already engaging in. So I just want to be really clear about that. A number of these things are already being done within our own city, and we're going to move into that. So Rochester, in the middle of this urban tree discussion and nature having positive impacts on human health, particularly mental health discussion, Rochester I have found to be way ahead of the game particularly in terms of urban trees. Thanks to the city of Rochester and specifically the Department of Forestry, Department of Parks, and the citizens of the city, almost 70,000 trees, if I'm not mistaken, have been planted. What I want to show you over here, I could go on and on about this, but I'm not going to because we don't have time and we have experts who can talk about this. But this is a dashboard that was created by the Department of Forestry that has every single tree listed, and you can click in on it and see the information. There has been a lot of care and a lot of deliberate attempts to involve community in figuring out how do we afforest or reforest the city, and how do we do it in a way that will benefit everyone. So urban tree programs are incredibly powerful. They take time, they take patience, but it is a measurable, it is something that can have measurable impact. It is trackable. And because of all of this, Rochester has been recognized as a tree city of the world, which is a very big deal. And there are still current operational efforts to position urban trees as essential parts of community. So, in other words, have no fear. We are in good hands, in my opinion, in the urban tree department, robust. Now, I wanted to mention over here another strategy that has been in really all over the world. It has been enacted and is finding its way throughout the United States. These are microforests, also known as Miyawaki forests, and they are very densely packed plantings, ideally planted by the community in which this tiny forest will be. It could be created on the size of a vacant lot, something very small. But the way it is planted and the way that it is managed means that it has the opportunity, anyway, to grow and become independent after 2 to 3 years, which is really astounding for a forest. And again, involving community in different ways to be a part of that process, since we know that there are positive health impacts, leaves us with kind of a double positive in thinking about microforests as another way of connecting people with trees. Community gardens and orchards, again, just very quickly to mention that Rochester is way ahead, in my opinion, in terms of all of the different activities and groups, nonprofits that are out there doing this really good work. And it is also important to think about Rochester as an ecological and artistic ecosystem with a lot of site-based art and creative practice. And one of the main venues of that, of course, is Ganondagan, and really trying to think about original stewards of land and of trees and what can be learned and how is that presented in creative practice. Also, art collectives, Echo Lab, which is an art collective that I am in with Rose Pasquarello-Beauchamp and Stephanie Aschenfelder, who are both at the University of Rochester. Work is all about intersection between narrative, ecology, and art. Biodance is another example, run by Missy Foles-Smith, who is also at the University of Rochester, which activates space through physical performance. There are many different entry points into thinking about how we can further develop our connection to trees, even in urban settings. And I would say, especially in urban settings. So, what are some of the challenges? There are always going to be challenges when it comes to thinking about that reconnection. And, the challenges for urban trees and cities really are similar across regions. And namely, that is access of the benefits of trees are not equally distributed. Tree inequity often follows a legacy of redlining and environmental racism, and that absolutely must be acknowledged. Here we can see an older map of the redlining areas in Rochester, and we can look over here at the tree equity score, which is at very high, I have to say. It's in the 80s, 86.7%. So we are making huge strides, but you can see that there still are differences. And those differences can become health inequities. And then those are civic inequities. And people don't have the same access, obviously, to the physical health benefits, but also the mental health benefits that urban trees provide. So, showing this, though, I do want to say that in my conversation with the Department of Forestry, there has been an intense amount of planting and stocking, I think is the term, in these areas that have been traditionally underplanted, and that is not going to be recognizable necessarily in the near future because it takes time for these to grow, but that the recognition is there and the deliberate efforts are there. And that means that we need to have communication, community education, and buy-in in order for those efforts to be fruitful. So urban canopy, as we know, is deeply entangled with the histories of race and class, housing policy, disinvestment. And we know that just as the lack of canopy has been a challenge, we know that providing trees is part of the solution, perhaps the biggest part. So let me move along here into my bigger question, which is, how do we develop a culture of trees? And what I mean by that is, how do we develop or enhance a set of communal values where trees are seen as absolutely essential infrastructure, regardless of where your thinking may place you on that initial spectrum of seeing nature as commodity, as resource, all the way over to believing nature is animate. The questions remain the same. And, planting trees is obviously an essential part of that, but doing that without changing the culture or enhancing the culture, whatever term you want to use, may not be enough, because a tree has to survive long enough to become canopy. And that requires care, and it requires funding, and it requires policy and patience and support. And most importantly, it requires communities that believe that trees belong there and will fight to keep them as healthy urban infrastructure. So where I come to on thinking about developing a culture of trees and using my skill set, which is in the more kind of creative practice area, is finding ways to build new and reclaim old environmental and cultural narratives. Additionally, I think we are going to have to reframe expectations of wild spaces and aesthetics. And this may seem quite simple, but it's a very powerful, we are in the United States are still very stuck under the power of the idea of the monoculture and the lawn and the English nobility, the English garden. And I'm not saying that there is anything necessarily wrong with a desire to have that in your personal space, but we do have evidence that monoculture leads to nothing. It feeds nothing. We know that biodiversity is going to not only help wildlife, but help our physical and mental health. So what does that mean? That means that people's lawns may not be so nice. They may not be as manicured. Healthy ecological landscape isn't supposed to be manicured, but changing the culture around ideas about aesthetics is like turning around and the Air Force carrier. And that's what I mean about being able to have artistic and creative practice to help in altering what that culture means, what things are supposed to look like, what is deemed as beautiful, what is deemed as clean. Also, dead wood. Dead wood is essential habitat. That's a different expectation than a lot of us would have again with these other aesthetics. We can rewild common spaces. We can rethink urban design. We can even consider trees as stakeholders in decision making. Ultimately, sorry. Ultimately, I want us to consider trees as living infrastructure that requires a different kind of civic relationship. We don't have to have a relationship with the infrastructure, such as our roads or our bridges. I mean, obviously, right? We um, we have to have um, a relational situation with our trees through care and not simply maintenance. So I am going to end. I want to end where I began, where I always begin, which is with images and with art, because ultimately Civic Canopy is an art project. And also because, science can tell us so much. I hate to have the binary of science and art, but thinking about how the different ways that we know things that I also mentioned at the beginning. Science can tell us a tremendous amount about what trees can do. It can measure canopy and temperature and cortisol levels and attention, depression, etc. And those measurements are essential. And at the same time, approaching things from creative practice allows us to ask different kinds of questions. What does it mean to live among trees? What does it mean to notice when one disappears? What does it mean to recognize the shape of a tree you see every day or notice when the seasons change? And what does it mean to understand that a tree planted today, if it is allowed to grow mature, provides shade for somebody who is not born yet? Because that ultimately is what civic thinking about trees as civic beings is about. It's about thinking beyond our lives and thinking about future lives. So perhaps developing a culture of trees really can begin with the question, what kind of relationship do we want to have with the living world that we know sustains us? We know how it sustains us. We're hopefully providing evidence for that. But what kind of relationship do we want to have in order to sustain it? And to close, I would ask the question for this specific conversation. What if some of the most powerful infrastructure that we have for dealing with mental health, cognitive health, emotional health, social health is actually growing right outside our window? Thank you.
Well, thank you for such a wonderful presentation. Um, I've been writing notes over here, and I have lots of notes, but I wanted to offer up to our audience if they have the opportunity. Now is your opportunity. Use I believe it's the Q&A function to insert any questions that you may have. And I do see that we're starting to get those. I will ask them. Let's see here. So beautiful presentation, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing these studies and their impact together in one place and for sharing the important work to light alongside your poignant images. Let's all go outside now. Yes, let's go outside now. Our next comment or question, let's see, Howard Thurman, a graduate of Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School and the
Yes.
first Black dean of chapel at Boston. You loved his favorite oak tree.
Mm, mm,
Boston,
beautiful.
Boston U, yeah, at Boston
Boston
U,
U.
loved his favorite oak tree.
Amazing.
Let's see here. Another question. How should cities decide where to plant new trees?
Wow. Well, that is a great question, and I'm not going to dodge it. However, I will say that we have one of the most responsive departments of forestry that I've ever encountered, and that is a question that actually should be directed toward them because, um, you know, one thing that I've learned throughout this process, which may have been obvious to others, but is that in the process of urban afforestation, it's not just planting trees and trying to get them in the ground, which would make sense, but has to be the right soil. It has to be the right type of tree. It has to be in the right location. And that it takes this mental algorithm that we really have to lean into our experts, and we have them in Rochester. So I would say, and I'm doing this for myself, anytime that you are having a question, you need to reach out, find the experts who are there. And because we all want, uh, everybody wants to root for success for the canopy, especially because our health is so tied to it.
Looks like we have another comment that came in. I love trees and also have had issues with them interfering with plumbing.
Yes.
I suppose we
Yes.
need experts in what types of trees fit in with
Yes.
our other infrastructure.
Yes. Yes, my friend. And I hear you. Me too. We had there, and unfortunately, that happens in my experience with some of the more mature trees. That the root systems do interfere, and yes, it is absolutely an issue. And it sounds like the participant already is totally on the right track of thinking about what are the types of trees that are going to work better because it is a balance. I'm not advocating for turning everything into a giant forest. Some days I do feel that way, but what are the ways that cities can really coexist with current infrastructure and then allowing nature to continue to flourish and thrive and contribute to our own health.
Thank
It's a
you.
problem, though. I hear you.
Thank you. Another comment has come in. Wonderful presentation. Are you familiar with the International Biophilic Cities Network? It was founded and is run by a former U of Virginia grad school professor of mine, Tim Beatley.
Tim
I
Daly?
Beatley,
Beatley. Okay.
Beatley. I'm thinking that there could be a very mutually beneficial connection between you
Yes.
and the Biophilic Cities Network.
Thank you so much for that. And I have not heard of it, and I've written it down. I will look into it today. Absolutely.
Great. You may not know the answer to this, but here's a question. How should cities balance the benefits of trees with the cost of maintaining them?
Oof. Wow. Yeah, that's another one that I would not know how to answer with the intelligence that you deserve on that. Um, what I will say is that in Rochester, city council is, in my experience, since I've lived in Rochester for the past 10 years, has been thinking quite a bit about this issue because I mean, anything is going to take maintenance and investment, which is going to mean funding, which means something else is not going to be funded. So again, it is a balance. And I think that it's a conversation that people need to have also with their council members because this is an open environment. I mean, in my where I come from, I mean, trees aren't really a lack of trees are it's not the issue, but there is not this kind of open dialogue with agencies and collaboration with nonprofits, even though I know it's not a perfect ecosystem. But here in Rochester, we really have the capacity to have those conversations and do some problem solving. So all I can say is that it is a budget issue and tough decisions will have to be made. Make sure everybody who should be at the table is at the table. And that includes the arborists, and it includes people from the community, it includes city council, it includes budgetary people, it includes artists and thinkers and change makers and cultural folks. Because together, I think we can come up with a better idea about what that cost benefit will be beyond bottom line. I know bottom line comes first.
All right, we have another question that's come in. Wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on changes to modern architecture we could also consider. For example, do you know of architects or designers trying to mimic nature or include it within their designs? It seems the overwhelming new buildings follow rigid designs, lots of right angles, limited windows, few include spaces for plants, and often the aesthetics or color choices are not earth tones.
Brilliant. Absolutely 1,000,000%. You are on the right track. Yes. And I think there is so much impact that urban designers can have on this entire process because as we saw even with these comparatively handful of studies that sometimes even viewing natural forms, being able to look at a building and not have that right angle, to have a fractal, to have, I mean, some things that one would think could be such a relatively easy thing to include in design have these massive outsized impacts. And not only that, if people are designing to have nature included, ostensibly, right, you're probably going to have, uh, you know, a more conscious process with your building. Maybe it'll be an energy zero building. Maybe you'll have a green roof. Maybe, I mean, it's going to have all of these other health implications and climate implications, hopefully, if one is thinking about nature in terms of urban design. And there are so many movements and so many people out there who are architects, but also city planners who are actively doing this and doing longitudinal studies about what the impact is. And absolutely, we need to move past this brutalist right angle. We need to depave, there are places all over the world who are engaging in this and having results. So I'll just leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have about 3 more minutes, time for at least one other question. And for those of you that have been inquiring, yes, the slides will be made available.
Yes.
If you need them, just reach out to my office and we will make sure that you get those. All right, so are there situations where planting more trees could unintentionally create problems for a community?
That is, I would imagine that is probably true. I don't want to misspeak on it. I know I keep kind of deflecting these, but since I'm not the arborist in the room, um, I just want to be upfront about that. I do think that perhaps there is a way that we can use space more wisely. So instead of thinking about planting so many trees in a neighborhood, understanding that there could be consequences from that, right? With the plumbing or with again, it depends on the soil, it depends on a number of factors. But yes, that could be a problem. What about thinking about using vacant lots as mini forests? Or being able to use vacant lots as city orchards. Maybe we can think about ways to distribute that canopy and distribute those elements and use our land more effectively that we do have. That is a short-term solution. uh, you know, urban design and there are a number of other things that are a longer term solution. But we have a lot of opportunities available to us that don't necessarily, I think, have to involve planting masses of trees in one area, unless, of course, that's what people want to do. Um, it's just what we do know. Again, bottom line is that we co-evolved with trees. I mean, trees are, millions and millions and millions of years older than us, but we are designed physically to interact with a certain type of natural environment. We know it's good for us. We have evidence that it is good for us. So the question for me is, what are we going to do with that information? We know that. So, how can we integrate this into our lives and our communities? And there are people doing this already in a way that will be mutually beneficial.
Well, thank you. You've actually given us a charge to take this information and see how it applies to our community and our community surrounding communities. And I feel like we all have a job to do now. So this has been great.
Thank
Um,
you.
Audience, please join me in thanking Andrea for joining us today. And I know that she can't hear our applause, but she can at least see my applause.
And thank
Thank
you
you.
to you, Chanel, and to
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. And we'll see you all next week for our final session of the summer. Thank
Be
you
well,
all.
everyone. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Bye bye.